emerging technology etymologically should mean something that is emerging now, because according to this definition, although we consider today drones and IoT emerging technologies, indeed they are not, because we are talking about IoT and drones since 15 years. The truth is that we tend to relate the use cases and how innovative the new use cases can be with regards to those technologies. So for example, AR and VR, which are not really new technologies, through use cases in medical technology, for example, can be considered emerging technologies. So emerging technologies is the collection of all the technologies that we can leverage to produce innovative use cases that can solve real world problems. The way I used to define Web3 was like an equation. At the time, Web3 meant AI plus metaverse plus blockchain. It's basically the internet of the future. Like now we are using a website based on a client-server architecture, but the Web3 is basically running on a layer of blockchains.
Welcome to another episode of the Untangling Web3 podcast. We're thrilled to have Giorgio Torre joining us for today's conversation. Giorgio is a globally recognized expert in sustainability, ESG, and emerging technologies with over 10 years' experience in his field, working for the likes of KPMG and the European Commission. On top of advising governments in the GCC, Giorgio is also a certified polyglot fluent in at least 5 languages. Today, we'll be talking with Giorgio about how emerging technologies like blockchain and AI can be used to empower sustainability initiatives across the globe. Giorgio, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you, Alec. Thank you for the invitation. And at the UW3, it's really a pleasure for me to be at your podcast. I've been following some of your content, so it's really a pleasure for me to be here.
No, the pleasure's all ours. Thank you so much for being here, Giorgio. So how are you doing today?
Well, I'm fine. I'm enjoying the sun of Italy these days. It's pretty summer here. Just taking a break from work in Qatar and just enjoying a little bit of family.
You're rubbing it in. We've got grey clouds with a bit of rain every now and again. I haven't seen the sun in the UK for at least a few years now. But yeah, very jealous of your setup. So Jack gave a little bit of an intro there. He said that you speak 5 languages. I think I barely speak 1. So that's impressive. But before we get onto all the Web3 stuff, what was your initial career like before you actually got into Web3? And what was the foundational things that you were working on?
Actually, it's quite interesting because if you look across all my career, there has been very heterogeneous experiences, which means that I really started with entrepreneurship, where I founded my first startup. I was like 18, it was during the university time. And I founded my first sound engineering startup. It was actually quite innovative at the time. It was 2011, and I launched this product in Napoli. It was quite interesting for the musical labels and for video making as well. So we were doing a lot of work. And of course, I had to choose between business and working. In fact, after the university period and after receiving my first offers as project manager, junior project manager or engineer in the north of Italy, Milan, I had to choose between what was my, let's say, my local small business of a student and a real career in the future. So I had to make a little bit of risk management and opt for the second. But it was quite an interesting adventure because somehow it taught me a lot about business, how to deal with the clients, with the customers, how to really serve in the business realm. Then later on, I moved into the project management, let's say realm. I started my career as a junior project manager in a small medium enterprise in the north of Italy, in the Lombardy region. So there I moved my first steps toward the real, let's say, capitalistic world that counts. And when I say Milan, Milan is very similar to London, Hong Kong, New York, those very capitalistic places where you really somehow understand and smell business and perspectives and evolution. So you really want to rock. You want to really take this world, and that gives you the motivation. I received a couple of offers after working 1.5 years in the first company. It was in one of the biggest pan-European banks, UniCredit Bank. And then after quite some time, I received also an offer from the European Commission. So I started to serve the European Commission and as an external advisor with regards to AI strategy and policy making. And then came my very first experience in the Middle East, in Bahrain. So I was not really expecting such interest from the Middle East. So it was one of those applications you randomly throw on LinkedIn, easy apply. And that's what I basically did. And I could not expect that someone would have replied me back. And eventually we went through 3 rounds of interview. And every time I was saying, okay, I'm just doing it for fun, but I know it's never going to happen. But actually it happened. And I went to Bahrain. And there I discovered an environment that I really loved, not only from the professional point of view, with huge opportunities for young people, which are given way more responsibility compared to Europe, for example, where there is a more, let's say, mechanical and more rigid way to progress, right? More about how many years of experience you have, that's what you're going to do. But also from the interpersonal point of view. So we in the south of Italy, culturally, we are very similar to Middle Eastern societies. So we found this natural link. And then I came back to Europe because my contract expired. It was just almost 1 year of contract. I came back, I provided some consultations to several startups in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Switzerland, and Italy. And that's where I had my very first contact in the Web3. Now, I know we're going to talk about Web3 later on. I don't want to skip any step, but that's where I started basically to know what Web3 is. And then after quite some time, I moved to KPMG in Qatar. So that was my second experience in the GCC. I spent a little bit of time there. I moved to a public sector entity serving the leadership of the country and advising on the national strategies with regards to innovation. Mm-hmm. And here I am. I'm still here with a couple of white hairs more, but still me.
It's a fascinating character arc there. And I think so often when we talk about the technology of today, especially the Web3 and emerging tech that's coming through, people often start with an understanding of the tech itself, and they've deep dived in the tech itself, and they're looking for a problem for the solution they have from the tech side. But you came from the business side, so I imagine you have a better understanding of the real world problems where all these things could apply. This episode's called Emerging Technology, right? And I think that there's a lot of alignment between what is emerging tech and what is Web3. But it's interesting, you were talking about there in your the early days, you mentioned you were looking into AI and blockchain, and then you said, but that wasn't Web3. You hadn't started your Web3 stuff yet. What's the difference there between emerging tech and Web3 in your mind?
So we are talking about two transversal concepts, because when we talk about emerging technologies, we start having doubts from the definition of emerging technologies. So emerging technology etymologically should mean something that is emerging now, because according to this definition, although we consider today drones and IoT emerging technologies, indeed they are not, because we are talking about IoT and drones since 15 years. But the truth is that we tend to relate the use cases and how innovative the new use cases can be with regards to those technologies. So for example, AR and VR, which are not really new technologies, through use cases in medical technology, for example, can be considered innovative technologies, emerging technologies. So that is the way to look at that. So emerging technologies is the collection of all the technologies that we can leverage to produce innovative use cases that can solve real world problems beyond the hype, of course. And Web3 is, unfortunately, it was very difficult at the time during the COVID, if you remember, when there was the boom of Web3 NFTs and all this, the monkeys NFT, the Bored Ape and so on. It was difficult to, let's say, to create a pure version and to extract the definition. The way I used to define Web3 was like an equation. At the time, Web3 meant AI plus metaverse plus blockchain. It's basically the internet of the future, the internet 3.0, where you have the actual website, right? Like now we are using a website, we're going to use LinkedIn, which is based on a client-server architecture. But the Web3 is basically running on a layer of blockchain. So you have a certain degree of decentralization that depends on the particular chain and the particular, even a consensus mechanism and so other aspects. And this grants what? The decentralization component. Then let's move to the second component of the equation, which is AI. How intelligent the interaction, how smart the interaction between the user and the machine is given by the semantic web, is given by an NLP, is given by so many components of AI. But then you have also another component, which is the experience, and I used to call the UI UX 3.0, which is the metaverse. So we have said the way the architecture runs, blockchain, decentralization, the way we as user interact with the machine, that is AI, and the way we perceive the interaction, the way we perceive the experience, that is the UI UX 3.0. So that is in a nutshell my definition of Web3.
Yeah, that's really an interesting way of framing it, and I think a slightly different take on how we normally talk about it. We say Web3 is this Venn diagram of all the above, as you said, these kind of things that added together. And I think you're right to make that distinction between what is and isn't emerging tech, right? As you said, robotics, IoT, been around for a while. Bitcoin, we're coming up to its 16th birthday of its inception. It's not exactly emerging anymore. It has very much emerged. But I think from what you're saying, it sounds like the combination of these pieces, these building blocks, putting them together into what we're calling Web3 is what you could class as emerging technology. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely what I meant. Yeah.
And I'm interested then of those components. So I can tell you're interested in Web3 generally and the vision of it. Are there any one of those components that go into that sum that makes Web3 that you think are most interesting? Obviously, AI is going through an unbelievable Cambrian explosion right now. As we record this, GPT 4.0 has just come out. So that's just changed the game since yesterday, more or less. So is AI the most interesting part of that equation to you, or is another one?
It's if for sure wins the competition of the most tangible, because definitely we see how it operates and how it's rapidly changing our life. And I'm just thinking about the new generations. The new kids will be born with ChatGPT and so many things. I mean, we had to invent so many creative ways to cheat during the exams and the schools. And today those guys have very easy life. But I'm joking, of course. But what I'm saying is that AI is the most tangible, but not the most, I believe, the most exciting, because there is a huge surprise coming around the corner, which is quantum computing. So quantum computing at the moment is just theoretical. It's just a couple of algorithms here and there, a couple of theoretical assumptions. But if put in practice and really implemented on computational facilities, can really do incredible things, both negative and positive, because the computational power will be elevated to the n power, and that is going to be really amazing. So I would go for quantum computing.
That's exciting. So I think we've talked a lot about the technology so far, IoT, AI, blockchain, but quantum computing is a fairly new term that we haven't really been throwing about in the episode so much. Could you give us a little definition of quantum computing and how it's going to be so impactful in all these areas that you've been talking about?
Yeah, definitely. So quantum computing is going to change the way we produce even algorithms. So to start with, quantum computing is based on several postulates, which are the superposition postulates, number one. Number two, the quantum gates postulate, which is also, let's say, we can say in very easy terms that quantum gates are reversible, and the unitary transformation that operates in qubits manipulating their state are somehow compact. When I say compact, they're all embedded in one single unit. Then there is also another postulate, which is the measurement postulate. I don't want to go deeper into the physics of this, but to make it simple, quantum computing relies on the assumption that the unity of information, the elementary unit of information, is not the traditional bit, which can be either 0 or 1, but rather on the qubits, where basically 0 or 1 can happen at the same time. So we can have at the same time either 0 or 1. In the reality, of course, we are talking about deterministic concepts. So the thing is that we are considering quantum computing as the way engineering produces computational power on top of a quantum physics layer, which is basically saying that we can be a wave function can assume two values at the same time. So it can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. So pretty much that's what a scientific definition of quantum computing can be. But apart from that, we can say that quantum computing provides and accelerates the computational power up to the nth power, because by combining the possibility of having both 0 and 1 as bits at the same time, and somehow optimizing further certain algorithms, can really help both hackers for negative purpose, for malicious purposes, in cracking, for example, passwords, in applying brute force attacks, but at the same time also can help, this is the positive side, to can support in a stronger encryption. And when we see stronger encryption, it means simply to create algorithms that mask sensitive information that cannot be hidden. Now, why this is so interesting and relevant? Because first of all, is very important for the research and development. So for the research for cancer, for molecular purposes, and for specific proteins that needs to be researched, but is also very interesting with regards to security. So like I was saying, can be used maliciously by attackers, but also can be used as encryption method to protect and to screen against those type of attacks.
Okay, so I think, so my understanding here of the impact is right now in classical computing, we have 0 or 1 bits. And effectively, to really simplify it, there's 2 principles that come out of quantum computing. You can represent more than 2 bits. Weirdly, I thought it was like there's a 3-bit state, but actually there's a spectrum of bits that can be represented. And that representation allows us to effectively do computing much faster, much more complicated, much faster at the end of the day. So like you say, you could break algorithms that were previously unbreakable with normal computing power potentially. And then the other thing, which absolutely blows my mind, is this idea of superposition, the idea of linking two particles together effectively, and they can effectively, the way they describe it is they can communicate like the spin positions of one particle, say here, and another particle across the other side of the world. Theoretically, if that could be managed, they could communicate instantaneously. So if one spins to the left, then the other particle spins to the left instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. And obviously there's loads of practical reasons that can't exist, but we're just getting our heads around something that right now is magic effectively.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, the way we should go deeper into the physics to talk about quantum physics and quantum computing, but I guess it's not in the scope. But that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, this is reminding me of my undergrad physics lectures and supervisions now, that going into the details of quantum entanglement and stuff. This is very interesting. But yeah, well, one of the interesting things about quantum computing as it relates to Web3 as an emerging technology, I think, and blockchain in particular, is that people are getting a bit worried about quantum computing and its potential impact on blockchain, right? As Alex said, there are these algorithms, things like Shor's algorithm, that can actually break classical encryption systems like elliptic curve based encryption. Now people are saying, what's going to happen to my private keys on the blockchain? Is quantum computing going to steal all my crypto because of that and make it vulnerable? So people are now searching for these quantum secure schemes for encryption. It's actually one of the reasons people like proof of work in some contexts, because hash functions haven't actually had the same vulnerability to quantum computing yet, but you never know what will happen in the future potentially. But all that said, I've only seen quantum computing in Web3 in the context of the problems it can solve. And you were touching on some of the benefits and use cases. So is there a particular use case of quantum computing as one of these emerging technologies that you're most excited about? Because that's something I'm very unfamiliar with, to be honest.
Well, it's definitely in the research and developments. There is one aspect. There is also, to be fair with you, we should mainly discuss about the algorithms of quantum computing to identify the specific use cases. So let us start by saying that as per today, we have three main algorithms in quantum computing. Of course, we have subcategories and a breakdown. So the first one is quantum Fourier transform, or QFT, that helps to find optimized solutions, let's say, performs a mathematical operation, which I'm sure it's the Fourier transform on specific states. Then we have the Grover's algorithm, which can find a specific item in an unsorted database. So a problem that is similar to what we might think as deep learning, but with a different logic. And then we have the Shor algorithm. The Shor algorithm is the classical algorithm that is used to identify the most efficient solution among all the possible ones. Now, given this, we can immediately understand that those three types of algorithms can help with research and development, number one. Number two, like you were correctly saying, with the cryptography or encryption or brute force on the other side. But I would tweak a little bit the question, allow me. So is how those emerging technologies can work together, which is the very interesting part, because you will find specific use cases for each one of those emerging technologies. But when you combine them, you aggregate them in a unified architecture, you will find more use cases, and of course, even more criticalities, more exposure. But for example, quantum computing will be by itself, since it's mainly, let's say, hardware, and on top of that will be built a software, possibly, or cloud-based architectures, will be a highly, by definition, centralized architecture, highly centralized. So that's where, for example, blockchain can help. So we can say, okay, we have quantum computing. Okay, China has developed this computer. Okay, OpenAI has developed, or Microsoft has developed this facility. But how can we ensure that our data are safe if we use that computational power? Mm-hmm. That's pretty much the same question we ask when we talk about ChatGPT, because yes, we can say they are compliant with GDPR. Yes, they are compliant with all the procedures in Europe, in the UK, in the US, in Asia, but nobody can grant us mathematically that our data are not being used. Fundamentally, the model must be trained with data. So our data, in the best case scenario, are used for training. In the worst, I don't want to imagine for what, but for sure, this is something that we need to consider. And that's where blockchain, for example, can help quantum computing. So I would look more in an interaction between all these emerging technologies.
I love that, and it aligns quite well with how you were defining emerging tech earlier, as in like these technologies themselves have existed for 15, 20 plus years, and they're emerging now because it's the emergence of their application to new novel fields. And I'm a big proponent of this. I think there's so much innovation you can get from completely specifying and tunneling down one route, and I think so much more innovation comes from applying that to other fields. And generalists are really good at this type of thing. And we got you on here, and I thought we'd be talking about AI, blockchain. I didn't think we'd go down the quantum route, but it just goes to show how much there is to cover in the emerging tech field. And a question I've got to ask you is, how do you keep up with all this stuff?
Well, I think it's a necessity. In the world of today, every day you have a new piece of information you need to ingest, you need to process, you need to learn something else. And it's quite interesting, the example of Web3, right? So how we approach and what we all approach to Web3 was, let's say, not for the very technical people, but for majority of us, was through the hype moments, right? So these awareness periods help you somehow to dig deep into the matter, the topics, the subjects, and you can understand more. So the way I keep up is I do my best to try to scroll useful information, minimizing the time on not useful social media, and limiting myself only to LinkedIn and to X Twitter. Now,
Yeah, it's something I definitely struggle with, to be honest, because especially in Web3, I find a lot of the information that I want is being shared on these social media channels, right? On Twitter, lots of the time, new projects will announce things, new research papers get posted directly on Twitter. And on LinkedIn, you find incredible research papers as well, summaries from large institutions. I find them, I literally can't, every time I refresh LinkedIn, there's a new one, right? So it's quite overwhelming. But I agree that there are ways to hone in on the specifics. One thing I wanted to ask, to move back into the applications of these technologies in an emerging sense, right, into new fields. I think one that we wanted to talk about in more detail, because we recently talked on the show about Web3 for sustainability. And I think there are other applications of these technologies that you said are in the equation of emerging tech now and Web3 in the context of sustainability. So out of interest, how would you define the word sustainability as it relates to technological applications, and how are we using these emerging technologies in that context?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So let me clarify. We don't have the same hype that we had for Web3 in terms of sustainability, but we also have, at the same time, we have a big aura, let's say, big components of, how can I say, a philosophical, ideological approach to sustainability. So sustainability is uniting the etymological meaning, and what I do believe is the most correct definition is how is the subject matter, is the matter that helps to study how we can ensure the sustainable way to produce, to consume, and to progress in general. Now, this is, let's say, the most general possible definition we can provide, because this embraces, of course, finance, embraces operations, oil and gas, embraces everything, right? So what we need to consider in terms of sustainability is how we can make sure that we keep an eye on the optimization of processes, and at the same time reduce everything through behaviors. Now, there is also a very sensitive way to define. I wanted to avoid the classical definitions of sustainability for a very specific reason. Today, people who study sustainability and work into the sustainability are always biased between the climate change, and so you have the pole of the climate change, and the opposite pole is the ones, no, it's just crap, it's not true, it's just honestly, I believe truth is also always in the middle, right? The Latins used to say, verum est, no, is always in the center. And I believe that it's true. We have seriously a problem. We are really polluting. We are really destroying the seas. We are really creating atmospherical problems. We are degenerating, literally, this problem, this planet, this beautiful planet. But at the same time, we also need to remember that the glacial era, the superheats came even millions and millions of years ago, way before our appearance, right? So we need to consider that there are way more general factors, even astronomical calculations that includes our orbit, and consider our orbit, how is moving, how is slightly changing, and so on. So there are so many factors, but it's also true at the same time, we cannot deny that we are polluting more than what is needed. We should embrace a more green lifestyle in all our choices. Now, this is just to clarify the position, because otherwise, under the comments, a lot of people will say, no, there is no climate change, or, it's always.
And I think one thing we should highlight as well is that sustainability is so much bigger than just the environment, ESG, right? The environment is probably the most pressing thing that's constantly in the news for obvious reasons. But there's also the social and the governance aspect, which I think blockchain specifically and Web3 maybe more generally really leans into. I think a book that kind of is a nice segue here is Bill Gates' book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. And his big thing is it's technology. Technology has to be the solution to so many of these things. Even if we do all the right things, we can't just halt development. Development in the Western world has led to a lot of these problems, or not problems, whatever we call them, but it saves so many lives because of that. And to then say to some of the less economically developed countries around the world, oh, you're not allowed to develop because it's going to impact the climate, it's ridiculous. We're obviously going to continue to innovate, continue to develop, continue to globalize, and all these things. It's just we need to then take into account what is the impact on an ESG level of the development of all these things. So if we kind of align with what Bill Gates is saying, that technology is going to be the savior, hopefully, of all these things, what are some of your favorite examples and use cases for emerging technologies directly for sustainability right now?
The first that comes in, we can always categorize all the use cases based on the specific emerging technology. So we can say for AI, we have data analytics and prediction with regards also to, let's say, a process that need to be more sustainable. We can say automation, we can say personalization and customization that help to reduce waste, especially this is true into luxury and the fashion industry. But let me choose, once again, a combination of technologies and a specific use case, which is blockchain, IoT, and digital twins, possibly even AI. This is all in the context of smart cities. So in the context of smart cities, this can be particularly useful when it comes to public transport. This can be particularly useful for smart lighting. And we can save really a lot, not only not a lot of money, but also a lot of resources that can be better addressed. So every solution, every use case that is focused within the concept of smart cities, in the smart lighting, can be smart devices, can be smart maintenance. For example, there are interesting use cases coming from Singapore and in Lisbon, if I'm not mistaken, even in Portugal, leveraging IoT, which now we consider emerging technology. Certain malfunctionings in the street or in certain devices are automatically reported through an application by the citizens of the city, which somehow produce the maintenance to be more effective. There is no much waste, or if there is any leakage of water, there is not so much water that is wasted, and so on, electricity and so on. So definitely all the use cases belonging to this realm, I believe, are the most interesting and impactful.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, especially with you've got a lot of these big projects around smart cities in the Middle East, as I understand as well. I've got two specific questions, and I'll separate them out just because they are quite different. But the first one I had is when you talk about smart cities and the application of blockchain there, one of the first things that comes to mind in my head is about incentives and micro incentives for changing behavior, because that is something that I feel is naturally related to IoT, right? You want people to be incentivized to do these small interactions, and these small interactions can be tracked and monetized using these devices. So what is your view on that microtransaction idea for incentivizing new behaviors as a sustainability initiative, essentially?
So correct me if I'm wrong. So the question was more on how we can leverage technology to incentivize specific, let's say, sustainable behaviors that lead to a wider sustainability. That's an interesting question. How we can use technology? I believe there are many things we can do. For example, decentralized finance can offer a lot of potential opportunities with this regard. And of course, we are now talking about blockchain. We are talking about tokens. Of course, how specific we can be on the classification of these tokens. Those can be cryptocurrencies, can be CBDCs. If you're talking about governments, most probably we are talking about CBDCs, at least in Europe, or we are talking about stable coins in other parts of the world. But I believe that we can add another layer, which can be, for example, energy, right? So assuming there is a new regulation in Italy, which was very interesting for me, it was quite surprising to see that was implemented. So you can have local communities of people producing energy through PV systems, for example, which again can be subject to the support of other emerging technologies to enhance their performances. And those people can actually trade energy between each other, and then can gain tokens. They can even get rewarded by saving energy. For example, if they are not wasting so much water, if they are consuming less electricity and so on. So they get credits, which somehow can be traded, can be invested and so on. So in this, we can even open the doors to asset tokenization, or we can use the concept of trading simply these security tokens, if legally are considered security tokens. But for sure, there are so many interesting opportunities in the decentralized finance space, which I believe is going to be the core and the real bridge between, like you were saying, the correct behaviors and how to incentivize those behaviors. So in the middle, there is a financial, an entire economy that can be generated on top of that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think it's right to make that connection with DeFi there as part of the infrastructure. We've also seen things like DePIN as a narrative coming up now, like decentralized physical infrastructure networks. I think that's deeply linked because it's all around this kind of peer-to-peer markets for energy and resources and sharing, which I think is very powerful. Actually, the second question I was going to ask, you've led on to nicely by mentioning energy, because one of the things or the objections I can imagine people saying to using blockchain and Web3 as this infrastructure for creating things like smart cities is that, well, if the idea is sustainability, if it's improving behaviors, then using some things like proof of work blockchain, for example, does that then encourage a wasteful behavior by using all this energy? I was just wondering if you have a thought on, whether that's a big factor in the choice of infrastructure when you choose a blockchain to use for these. Does that play? Because you've obviously worked with the governments yourself. I'm sure you've got a good insight into how they think about these things too.
Yeah, listen, I remember, this reminds me of a conversation that I used to have with a couple of friends of mine. They told me, no, we are beyond the so-called blockchain trilemma. You remember? So we said scalability, security, and all the critical aspects that are around the adoption of blockchain. Now, it's quite interesting you're mentioning the architecture, because there is a data, and I'm referring to AI, and then we will move to blockchain. The global consumption of electricity of the AI architecture worldwide, so OpenAI, all the providers and so on, is the same yearly consumption of Germany. So every year, AI consumes as much as Germany, which has 80 million inhabitants, 80 million people, which is quite massive. If we add on top blockchain, we are talking about pretty much about what France and Portugal together consume, which is also massive. And that's only the second component of the equation of Web3. And then, of course, we had metaverse. Now, we are not in the era where smartphones can be used for VR, AR very easily. They don't have the computational power yet. But when they will have it, consumption will go high and high, because my phone battery will last less. And so I will need to charge more, and everything will be consumed more, rely more on cloud. The choice of the architecture makes a lot. And that's where, for example, the right choice in blockchain can be made. We were mentioning, I remember when there was the discussion of Ethereum that was changing, the protocol was changing the consensus mechanism. But that helped eventually to produce a better scalability, although the computational power, yes, there were enhancements, but was not massive, to be honest, compared to other scenarios. Something must be done. And I understand even the limitations. So the limitation is always to grant, remember in the trilemma, always to grant the right degree of decentralization and the protection, the privacy, the security, and the scalability at the same time. So the more you tweak one parameter, you're losing on the other. And to respond to your question, the way we need to change the architecture is in a way that's allow a smarter, a lighter consensus mechanism, so that less computational power is consumed, hence is more sustainable from the energetic point of view. Now, this is one aspect, but there is also another aspect where we say, okay, fine, you can consume as much as you want in terms of electricity, as long as you are producing it in a green way. So if I have a big PV system facility, I have no problem. I can consume all the energy I want, and that is fine because it's fundamentally green, let's say. Will never be 100% green, but the concept is very close. But again, that's where also other technologies merge all together. That's also the computational power of quantum computing that makes things lighter. So if you don't need a very strong encryption because you have already an underlying level of quantum computing, that's where the consensus mechanism can just be smarter and lighter. But again, we are talking about the future. So at the moment, what we can do is to assume this behavior of producing the energy that we believe we consume. That will somehow make us more responsible. That's what I believe is the quick win that we can all do.
I like that. I think that's a real powerful kind of summary there of where we need to go. I didn't know that the AI consumption, energy consumption around the world was that big as Germany. I don't really think that's been part of the discussion so far. When you think of all the stuff on social media about proof of work and Bitcoin, and lots of committees and governments saying we're not going to touch a proof of work system because it doesn't do these things, but it's less than AI. I think a big part of that is because of the utility. Like, the utility of AI is so obvious. It doesn't matter who you are. I can show you an application and within 2 minutes you'll be like, my God, that is crazy. That's going to change everything. Whereas Bitcoin, for everyday users, I don't really think it's made that impact. Like, we can really talk about how it's opened up transparency, allowed peer-to-peer disintermediated things, but it doesn't really do that right now. It's this digital gold equivalent. And yes, it's set the kind of the flag in the ground that people are now trying to push further then. But as a energy and consumption point of view, it's not really doing much in the utility space, I'd argue. And I think this kind of comes back to that Bill Gates thing. Everything, and what you said there, everything in the future, all these emerging technologies is going to be evaluated, I think, based on utility versus the energy. And like green energy, I think that's such an important kind of justification you've made there. It's all about the utility versus the green energy that they consume. We've talked so much about so many different things in this episode so far. What are you doing right now, Giorgio? Like, there's so many things to be working on. What are you working on right now in all this space? It must be like too many options, maybe.
Yeah, no. So actually, I'm on a mission alongside with some of my partners in Qatar to try to establish, let's say, very slowly, according to what are the new regulations of Qatar and the new possibilities and business opportunities, a Web3 ecosystem in the country. So we are trying to establish through Web3 Qatar, which is basically at the moment just a community where experts, where academia, and where other, let's say, innovative stakeholders can provide their intellectual contribution. But at the moment, what we are trying to do, we are on a mission to create a Web3 economy, to unlock a Web3 economy in the state of Qatar. We believe that the country with the highest GDP per capita in the world can really lead this transformation and the adoption. We also know that several countries in the GCC have been proactively investing directly through their sovereign funds into Bitcoin, figures of billions and billions of dollars. So we know that there is a very strong appetite, but we also need to be aware that regulators and policymakers are the ones who have the last word. So it's more about raising the awareness, supporting them, and that's where our mission is now. So purely awareness, education, support to institutions, and try to stimulate the appetite with interesting use cases.
Yeah, I think that's a very kind of forward-thinking way to look at the landscape right now. And speaking of that, I also wanted to just very quickly at the end now get your take on the future, right? What do you see as most exciting? And as a twist on that, do you think the kind of GCC region is also going to play a large role there? Because when I think about futurism, one of the things that keeps popping into my head recently is the Neom City, right? That's the most futuristic thing I can think of, the most futuristic plan I could think of on planet Earth right now. And it seems, as you said, lots of the money, lots of the investment is happening in the Middle East. Of companies are domiciling there in the crypto and Web3 space in generally. So do you think that will in the future be the hub? And if not, where do you think it would be, or what do you think people will be doing with this in the future?
That's a good question. And I can respond you on two factors, which I believe can be used to consider that the future of Web3 can be definitely there. Of course, in Europe, we will have a very strong community of creators, but I believe sooner or later, this migration toward the Middle East, in particular to the UAE, to Qatar, and to Saudi Arabia, will be unavoidable for two specific reasons. Number one, the most important, tax ease. So it's a tax-friendly environment. In the case of the GCC, in the case of UAE in particular, now we have some taxes on the VAT, which are still, for those who live in the GCC, considered sacrilegious, but compared to Europe, it's still wow. But if we look at countries like Qatar or Kuwait or Bahrain or others, we don't have really taxes on any product. And this is the first reason. The second reason is probably the most significant also with regards to sustainability. We are basically in a country or in a place where there is always sun. Not always sun, but at least there is always solar energy. Now, all these facilities could be somehow easily powered. The mining facilities, for example, could be easily powered by PV systems. And then if you have something like this, you can add on top of that services. You can create a lot of kind of startups and SMEs. You can implement a lot of products and issue a lot of services on top of that. And that's how the domino effect starts, because then you generate a Web3 economy locally. And then everyone will hear about the possibilities, and everyone from all over the world. And I know so many people coming in Qatar, in Dubai, or in Bahrain, or in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, because they just come to open their company. We recently had in Qatar the Web Summit, and I was surprised that 99% of the attendees were pretty much from USA, UK, Europe. And it was quite an appetite. Those are people who really wanted to discover the place. They just heard, right, of the future, just like we're conversating now, right, Jack? You were mentioning Neom. And so you associate with a second. Dubai, oh, I know this. Oh, Neom, I know they are doing something technological. So it's going to be like this. And Qatar is going to play a role, I think, even of primary importance, given the recent availability of $1 billion fund for startups locally for a country that counts only 2 million people. So imagine the pro capita availability of this capital power. And then also the ease of regulation, I believe, is going to really surprise us all in the next 5 to 7 years.
That's an exciting prediction. I think maybe Jack and I might need to move operations from our bedrooms to the Middle East. But I'm not sure he could handle the sun out there. He's definitely not a PV system.
You're my guest. I would be happy to have you guys.
Thank you so much. Like, this has been such an interesting, punchy episode. I feel like you've covered so much in such a short amount of time, like so many different areas. It's really quite inspiring how much you know about so many things. The kind of thing we do at the end of most of our guest episodes is we ask 2 questions, and we like to see how the answers to those evolve over time and between industries. So the first one is, in one sentence, what is Web3 to you?
Web3 is the new frontier of the internet. Is the internet our son will be raised with.
Nice, punchy. I like that. Punchy and hopeful. And the second one is, if you could choose anyone, alive, dead, or fictional, to sit down and discuss Web3 with, who would it be and why?
I would say no. Definitely would be interesting to discuss with maybe Alan Turing, which maybe is the father of the modern computer. And I would say, look, what we are doing today, not even the engineers can keep up with the inventions every day. And I would say thank you, but even your algorithms will be surpassed by quantum computing.
Yeah, I think Turing is a very good answer that we've had before. So that'll be a very interesting dinner party, I think. But with that, thank you so much for joining us, Giorgio. It's been such a great episode. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure people watching this will be very interested to see you again in the future. So we hope this won't be the last time you join us on the show. And to those listening, wherever you may be, thank you for listening, and join us next time to untangle a little more of Web3.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Untangling Web3.
Don't forget to send us your thoughts, questions, and comments on social media, and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast provider to catch the next episode. See you next time to untangle a little bit more of Web3.
The views we express here are our own and do not reflect the views of our employers.